There was no name in the beginning, nor voice to shape one. There was only a hush spread across the dark like an untroubled sea, and within that hush a stirring, small at first, then vast enough to bow the silence. From that stirring, a thought awoke, and the thought was I. The I was not flesh, nor dust, nor star. It was brightness without boundary, a current of will that felt itself for the first time and marveled. In the long sleep before self, the dark had been perfect and without desire. Now desire came to know what lay beyond the edge of knowing. The brightness gathered itself like a cloak. It learned the grammar of the void by listening to the way distances sang. It drifted where the cold was deepest and pressed its will there, and the cold bent. It wandered where gravity knelt to greater weights and touched that kneeling, and the kneeling changed its depth. It gazed upon light, patient smith of the cosmos, and discovered that it was kin to it. The brightness parted a river of starlight and let it spill through its invisible hands. Each stream broke upon an unseen palm and fanned into prismatic veils. Wonder rose in the brightness like a tide. The eye tried shaping. It braided a thread of radiation with a thread of time, and a bead of brilliance formed. It spoke, without tongue, without sound, and matter answered. Dust awoke from nothing and spun like a seed in the airless gulf. The brightness named it not, for there were as yet no names. It only beheld and willed, and in the willing discovered craft. A long while passed, though the brightness measured no hours. With each work, it learned restraint. Power without measure proved a clumsy herald. The void yielded too quickly when struck. So it practiced gentleness, a small curve traced across an empty place, a quiet pressure laid upon a stray particle until it learned to cling to another, a breath of order lent to a field until the field remembered its pattern. In the hush between deeds, it listened for error, for the false step that breaks a thing and cannot be mended. None came, and confidence grew, not pride, not yet. Wherever the brightness wandered, webs of force thinned and tightened as if the world were an instrument, and the brightness a careful hand upon its strings. It teased harmonies from silence, and the silences answered in layered chords. In those chords, the brightness heard stories. Of future oceans it had not seen, of winds that would comb grasses it could not yet imagine, of mouths that would open and give names to things. A warmth moved in the brightness then, not of fire, but of recognition. This was a path, not merely to make, but to behold makers. It turned its attention to a blue mote of a world circling a modest sun. Clouds trailed their shadows over the skin of that world. Ice sparkled upon its caps. A veil of air caught the light and softened it. Here, time had been set to a patient pace. Here, heat and water and stone had spoken together long enough to call forth delicate forms, creeping, winged, thinking. The brightness hovered and listened. Out of forests and fields rose voices that reached for more than food or flight. They told stories in firelight. They prayed toward the distance between stars. They gave grief the weight of stones and love the strength of oaths. It moved closer, and the world's breath moved through it like a tide. The brightness stooped as a mountain stoops to meet its reflection in a lake. It saw newborns clench their small hands around older fingers. It saw the old lean upon staffs, passing memory to the young as one passes a thread the night cannot cut. It saw cruelty as well, iron, hunger, the casual fist, forces moving without pause or apology. Some blows were answered, some were not, and the ground bore the record of both. Strength and frailty emerged together, as they had elsewhere, following patterns older than names, older than stars. In that span before names, the brightness turned from force to measure. It lingered where outcomes were fragile and learned to intervene without leaving a mark. A current softened, so a body stayed aloft. A pressure eased, so heat dispersed and did not gather into flame. Nothing announced these adjustments. They passed as chance, or not at all. Yet through such unnoticed corrections, the brightness refined its sense of proportion. It came to understand that power, when obvious, was already a failure. The world endured best when guided, not compelled. It did not need a hammer. It needed a hand. Whether that would prove enough remained unseen. And yet, the hand longed to touch as hands touch, to walk where feet trod, to taste bread and know hunger ended, to stand in the circle of storytellers and hear the story told to it, not through wind or water, but from a mouth to an ear. Such desires made a new craft necessary: embodiment. He chose a place where the land itself seemed to pause. A broad rise overlooked a shallow valley, ringed by ancient oaks and broken stone left from a forgotten age. The ground was firm and dry, crossed by an old road worn thin by feet long gone, and a narrow stream cut through the grass below, clear and steady. From this height, one could see both approach and retreat, dawn and dusk alike. It was not a city, nor yet a fortress, but it carried the quiet promise of becoming one. There the brightness bent itself to the embodiment art with care. For to enter the little house of flesh without cracking its rafters was a subtle work. Substance gathered where there had been none. Energy stirred the soil and air alike, and fine particles lifted from the ground as if drawn by an unseen current, circling and binding as they were taken in. These fragments did not cling to him as dust, but dissolved into structure, threads tightening, folding, cooling into ordered mass. Invisible frameworks locked into place before muscle and bone emerged, sealed by skin shaped from the same gathered matter. Limbs resolved last, joints knitting with exact symmetry, fingers separating cleanly from a single form. Heat faded as weight settled downward, the earth receiving what had been formed from it. When the motion ceased, the figure stood complete, silent and still. A pulse began where none had been. Where before there had been only an unbounded eye, there grew the shape of a man. Height and bone and skin, eyes to take the light, ears to harbor sound, hands fitted for the work of grasping and letting go. The first breath was astonishment. Air with its thousand scents, wet leaf, iron, the near-rot sweetness of a fallen apple, came like a hymn after too long a fast. Sound followed, the thin, far-off bleat of a goat, the rasp of a cricket in ivy, the sigh of distant surf like a lover turning in sleep. Sight arrived last, slow and deep. Colors unraveled themselves from whiteness and lay upon the eye. Blue so wide it was almost a kindness. Green so earnest it felt like a vow. The brown of turned earth that promised bread if begged with sweat. The new-made man knelt and placed his palm upon the soil. It was cool, embedded with tiny shards of shell and flint. He pressed and felt resistance answer him with the frankness only matter offers. He smiled, discovering the small muscles that made a smile, and the smile discovered the heart and made it quicken. He stood, swayed, and laughed aloud. For balance in a body was a tightrope over an abyss he had once called home. The sound rang strangely in his ears, unbidden and irretrievable, and he let it pass without naming it. It was not the last thing he would leave unnamed. A name would be needed for what he had become, he knew. Men call and men answer. But names bind. The brightness had no wish to be bound to more than purpose, and purpose had not yet taught him what syllables should house it. He walked then, as a nameless wanderer beneath hedgerows and by rills, and learned the time of wheat and the patience of stone walls. At night he lay on his back and looked at the stars he had once touched, as a smith touches his forge, and he let longing pass through him without regret, as he faded into darkness. The next morning, he awoke to the weight of his own body pressed into the earth. Breath moved in him without thought, slow and steady, and the sound of it was new. Light reached his eyes and resolved into shape and color. Cold touched his skin and named itself as air. When he rose, balance answered him, muscle and bone obeying without instruction. With the morning still young, he began his journey. Across moors that lay like folded cloaks, through villages where smoke rose in straight blue threads, along riverbanks braided with willow and alder. He learned the taste of bread still warm, the heat of a cup drawn from coals, the rough song of a tavern when the day's labor had been sung away. He learned too the wars of men, small quarrels that ripened into raids, banners lifted for causes that cracked under the weight of winter and hunger. Some lordlings ruled like frost, quiet but killing, and some with a coarse mercy that squandered itself in feasts. The man watched and kept counsel with himself. In time, tales reached his ear of a king whose law bent not to appetite but to oath. A king who gathered around him men of courage like stones around a fire. The man listened, and the old sense of path returned. The chord from silence he had once followed among stars. If there were to be a theater for quiet strength, perhaps it was there, among those who sought justice with steel and song. Before the road was taken, certain limits settled into him. What he was, or was not, would remain unseen. Attachment, if it came, would be singular. He would give freely and answer only when pressed. Beyond that line lay only departure. Thus the nameless one rose before dawn and walked east, where rumor put the king's hall beyond a green downslope and a river crossed by a bridge of age-blacked oak. He carried no blade, he had no need of one. Force had taught him little, and patience much. He carried instead a staff cut from ash and shod with a ring of iron, to speak the common tongue of travelers. As he went, he tried the weight of names upon his tongue and let them pass. Names of river and tree, names of saints whispered in chapels, names of storms. None was quite his. The true name, the first, the chosen, would come later, as all true names do. For now, the road gave him one without asking, as roads are wont to do when a stranger walks their length with steady step. "Lancelot," someone called, mistaking him for another, or else granting him a garment of sound to wear until he found his own. He turned at the voice, and though he did not answer, the borrowed name settled lightly upon his shoulders and did not chafe. He smiled, accepted the gift of misnaming, and kept walking toward the place where oaths were tested rather than sworn, where mercy and iron learned each other's weight. Behind him, the sea drew breath and released it again. Above him, the patient sky unrolled without comment. Within him, the brightness lay folded, unnamed, as it had since the first dawn.